The pennant races are looking a little more concrete as we are going to be entering late September. Meanwhile, the American League MVP is a race of philosophy. And do the Diamondbacks hold the key to going to the postseason? Let's have a Locked On MLB, Locked On Diamondbacks crossover. Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host. I am an Emmy-winning – no, I'm not an Emmy-winning. I'm an Emmy-nominated. I almost padded my resume. Emmy-nominated producer of television, comedian, sometimes filmmaker, sometimes writer, podcast for the last 10 years. My name is Paul Francis Sullivan. You call me Sully. Right over there, that's Millard Thomas. He is the host of Locked On Diamondbacks. Every Monday we get together to yap about baseball. And you know what? There are worse ways to spend your days. Hey, follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and on Instagram. And I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Millard, where can people follow you?
Hey, you can follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account, or follow the show account Locked On Diamondbacks both Twitter and Instagram. And of course, we're on YouTube as well. Locked On Diamondbacks on there as well. So don't forget to hit subscribe. And we're on all your podcasting platforms.
All right, I just want to again pull back the Wayback Machine a little bit on the 4th day of September, just before we're heading into Labor Day. The Minnesota Twins defeated the Chicago White Sox 5-1, and with that, they entered into a tie for first place in the American League Central, knowing they had, let's count them off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games head-to-head with the Cleveland Indians, the team they were tied with. All they had to do was enter those Cleveland series, break even, and then win those Cleveland series, and Minnesota could be punching their ticket for October. What happened, Millard Thomas?
They did not win those games.
No, they did not. In fact, they went on an absolute nosedive. They got swept at home. They lost 3 games at home to Cleveland. And then they lost the first 3 games, the 3 games at Cleveland this weekend, including a 15-inning game that I have no evidence is over. Meanwhile, with that, the first 6 games head-to-head, they've lost. Now, they won today, but the words too little and too late have come to mind as they dropped their first 6 head-to-head matchups. Their best-case scenario is they would lose 6 out of 8 head-to-head games that were desperately needed. And with that, they went from on September 5th, tied, dead even, and here we are on September 18th. They are 6 games back with, 18 left to play. That's a disaster. That is a complete disaster. And with that, and the White Sox have crept a little bit closer to Cleveland, but with Shane Bieber pitching like a Cy Young candidate, it looks like Cleveland has all but wrapped this up with this disastrous series for Minnesota.
Yeah, the Twins controlled their own destiny at the end of the season for whether they should make the playoffs or not, and they were able to get it done against their own division opponents. Like you said, the schedule was laid out for them. They had all the games against the Cleveland Guardians to lock down the division. They weren't able to get it done. Now, the Twins, they have a lot of question marks entering the season because I still feel like this was a year where you still kind of overperformed expectations if you're the Twins franchise, but it's still like a weird period in your franchise. It's kind of like a transition period. It's like, what do you do with that Carlos Correa contract? He's got a player option basically for every single season. Like Byron Buxton had a good year, but it's another year where he only played like 90-something games and he couldn't stay on the field. And you look at a lot of that roster, like the talent either overperformed expectations or there's just a lot of holes on that team. So if you're the Twins, I don't know if you double down on this team and you say, let's improve, let's retool, and let's keep adding pieces to this roster that we already have, try to compete again next season. Or you're like, you know what? Maybe we just overperformed expectations. We're really not in a place to compete. And let's just trade Carlos Correa, let's trade Byron Buxton, and let's rebuild. Because if you're the Twins right now, I don't know exactly where you go from here.
Well, the Twins made the wild card in 2017. They won their division in 2019. They won over 100 games in 2019. They won the division in 2020. They had a bad year last year. I thought last year was the aberration, which is why I actually picked Minnesota to go to the playoffs this year. I thought Correa was going to be a positive influence. And right up until, I mean, heck, I mean, they were in first place from Memorial Day. I mean, let me just go here. From until they were in first place until, by themselves until early August,
Mhm.
and they took control of first place. They jumped into first place right around mid-April. So for the majority of this season, the Minnesota Twins were in first place by themselves. And then it just collapsed the final third of the season. This is reminiscent of what happened with the Mets last year in San Diego last year. But this looked like a decent team. And again, they were in first place. They were tied for first place in September.
Do you think that's part of like the Tim Kirchin argument though, when he says this is why we need 162 games, because over the length of the season, things will start to even itself out. So maybe the Twins were really good for those first 100 games, but the more you play throughout the season, you look at like a basketball series, like the better teams eventually were able to hold on to the end. And maybe the Twins, when you look at the team on paper, they weren't exactly stacking up against the rest of the teams in the American League. So maybe they were one of the better teams for that first 100 games, but they weren't able to get to the finish line in the end.
I think the 162 games is the great equalizer of baseball, which
Yeah.
is one of the reasons why, I feel like I'm not the biggest fan of adding more teams to the postseason. I'm fine with it because it beats the alternative, which was a long, prolonged lockout. It's the same reason why I bit my tongue and said, okay, we have a universal DH. Okay, fine, we have a universal DH. I didn't want a universal DH, but we got one, but it avoided the lockout. Fine. I don't necessarily want it expanded playoffs, but if that's what's going to avoid the that's better than not having baseball. And who knows? The wild card round could be a great, huge success. I've kicked and screamed at every single addition to postseason since they added the wild card, so I've been wrong every time.
Yeah,
But
I think I was just gonna say, I think for the like expanded postseason, I think that's more just about like increasing eyeballs for the regular season more than anything. I don't think the expanded postseason actually like is a bigger draw for like the playoffs. I don't think it makes the playoffs more interesting. I think it just makes the end of regular seasons more interesting.
yeah, I
Like,
mean, we're going to see that,
yeah.
but this year is looking like it may be a bit of a flop because the races are. I mean, unless the Guardians go on a tailspin or the Padres go on a tailspin, there's really no exciting races that are. I mean, the Padres and Brewers going for the final playoff spot. Okay, it looked like the American League Central was going to turn to a three-way scrum, but the Guardians, today notwithstanding, have kind of pushed everything aside. I want to point something out here because I keep track on the summer score
Mhm.
uh, about people who are in the postseason or not. When the Twins for when the Twins tied for first place on September 4th, and then they dropped out the next day. That was the last day there was any change in the teams that are going to the postseason. The Astros, the Yankees, the Blue Jays, the Rays, the Mariners, and the Guardians. It's been those teams steady every single day, all but one day since August 10th. Except for one day since August 10th, those have been the playoff teams. So you'll have nearly, when it's all is said and done, you'll have a month and a half of the exact same teams, maybe moving the position up and down, but no new teams in there. In the National League, there has been no change in the teams that are the playoff teams, Dodgers, Mets, Padres, Atlanta, St. Louis, and Philadelphia, since the 6th of August. It's been over a month and a half since there's been any change in maybe the positioning, but it's been a month and a half of the same teams every single day.
You know what it sounds like, Sully? It sounds like an argument for shortening the schedule, because if you shortened it to those 120 games, and you would have had those close races already finished, at the month or so ago when the races were close. Because, like you're saying, as the season wears on, those races, those final 3 weeks, the month of the season, we already knows who's locked into those playoff spots. Yeah, there might be one wild card, spot up for grabs, but for the most part, those final 3 weeks, we already know who's locked into playoff seeding for the most part. So there's not really a lot of intrigue this extra month of the season. If we ended the season a couple months earlier, then all those close playoff races would have came down to the wire. It just would add a little bit more intrigue than seeing basically teams just separate themselves from the rest of the pack with how it goes the last 3 weeks of the season.
And I've been saying this since a video I made in 2011, that the baseball season needs to end on Labor Day.
Yep.
Because that's the end of the summer, and that's when all attention is going to football.
Yes.
So if you had the pennant races down the stretch in August, when people can go to the games and everything like that, and if you have expanded the playoffs, that allows you to say, okay, these would have been all the teams that would have been, been the best teams at the end. And let's say you have it be, let's say 140 game schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You also probably save a few arms along the way. Maybe you save a little, maybe you don't have the injuries that you have down the stretch. Maybe you spread things out a little bit. Obviously, I love baseball. I don't even know who played in football today. I don't care. But that's because that's the level of fan I am. But I know that most people aren't. I know most people are getting into football big time right now, and it's ridiculous to try to take what should be the down the stretch they come month and then expect everyone to pick baseball up again in October. Imagine if the playoffs were going on right now. The cities that are super into it would be watching it. Most interest in playoff baseball is local teams anyway. So if the Dodgers were in it here in Los Angeles, or if the Yankees were in, Yankees and Mets, or the Phillies or the Mariners, whomever in there, St. Louis, those cities would be going gaga. Everyone else will have already turned to football like they already have.
Yeah.
It's like screaming at the tides. So you have expanded the playoffs. I'm all for shortening the season.
Because I'm definitely the guy when football comes on, I'm locked into fantasy football. I'm in my sixth league. So I'm getting distracted because baseball, the playoffs are not just bleeding to football. Like, I'm also working for Arizona Coyotes. Like, hockey season's getting ready to start. Basketball season's around the corner. Like, baseball is literally bleeding their playoffs into 3 other sports that are like starting right on time. So it's like you got You got like that new season feel. You want to watch all the games. You want to see all your new teams, but yet the baseball playoffs are going on at the same time. Like, and Labor Day. I want this season to be over before football even starts because I don't want any bleed or over. I mean, as a sports fan, I love it when we have all 4 sports going on at one time. It's a crazy feeling. But for marketing baseball and increasing the exposure in the eyeballs of baseball, like, end it before football starts and all the other sports start.
And you would have baseball bleeding into November now. Start the playoffs for the first week of September, and if it goes out the way it'll probably end early October, where the weather still feels like baseball. Imagine a few years ago, both Colorado and Minnesota made the postseason. They didn't get far, but they both made the postseason. Imagine if we're playing a November World Series game at Coors Field and Target Field in the snow. Is that what we want? You know what? I'm willing to bet money that nobody wants to see that. And if you want to bet money, overlay. It is time for BetOnline, your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all the latest football league developments that I follow so closely, game matchups, news, and podcasts. BetOnline is also your continued source for all your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Hey, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. That's betonline.net. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. We were talking about philosophical issues of starting the season late or early. We talked about this a little bit on the last podcast, but it's reared its head again. The debate of the MVP of Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge. And this weekend, both of them made their cases. On Saturday, Shohei Ohtani, as the pitcher, kept the Mariners off the board for 7 innings, allowing 3 hits, 1 walk. He struck out 8 strikeouts to 1 walk, got an RBI double, and then scored the other Angel run. So the Angels won 2-1. He was involved in both runs offensively, and then pitched 7 innings with an 8-1 strikeout ratio and didn't allow a run. I mean, that's high school star stuff. You know, when the high school star is the star pitcher and the star hitter and everything like that. That's insane. And if you take a look at, Ohtani, the pitcher, is a legit Cy Young contender.
Yeah.
He has 196 strikeouts in 148 innings pitched, 25 starts. His ERA is 2.43. His ERA plus is 1.64. He's only walked 36 batters, 196 strikeouts to 36 walks. And toss in the fact that his OPS right now is 891. He has 34 home runs. He's going to drive in 100 runs. And throw this in too. He has 11 stolen bases. There's literally nothing in the game he doesn't do. However, Aaron Judge hit 2 home runs today. 2 in a game with the Yankees. It's not just he's piling up these stats. He has been the rock when the Yankees went on that spiral and all the injuries took over. There is barely an offensive category that he doesn't have bold italicized on his baseball reference page. You like old-timey stats? Runs, home runs, RBIs, walks. He's leading the league in all of them. You like on-base percentage, leads the league in it. Like OPS, leads the league in it. Like OPS plus, leads the league in it. There are categories that I don't even understand. He leads the league in it, and he is the reason why the Yankees have not collapsed. This is the hardest MVP decision since Miguel Cabrera won the Triple Crown, but Mike Trout was arguably better across the board. I personally think they got that right. They gave Cabrera the MVP, Trout the Rookie of the Year, and eventually Trout went on to win 3 MVPs, so I really can't cry for him. And Shohei has already won an MVP, so I'm not going to cry for him either. Just being said, he literally does everything except field.
Yeah. This debate, this is one where I hear both sides of the argument. This is one where everybody's a winner. There's no wrong answers here. But I hate how definitive people get when they say it has to be Ohtani because he does everything. He can do more for his team than a Judge. And a lot of that is true because Ohtani, like we've talked about, is an elite offensive position player. He's an elite pitcher. He leads the American League in strikeouts per 9. He's basically the most efficient strikeout artist we have in baseball. And he's going to put up historic numbers basically every year. I think most years I will default to Ohtani as the MVP. But this season, Sully Baseball, I think I'm going to have to give the MVP to Aaron Judge. I know he doesn't pitch, but it's not like he's just having a casual 45 home run, 120 RBI season. This is one of the most historic home run seasons we ever seen in Major League Baseball. Basically, the greatest season we've ever seen clean from a home run hitter since basically the 1900s. Like, we talk about Ohtani, what he's done. We haven't seen it in over 100 years since Babe Ruth. Well, this might be the highest home run record clean since Babe Ruth as well. This might be the best home run season we've seen. He could crack top 5 home run single season records. He can get to 65 potential home runs this season. And if Aaron Judge does that, I'm sorry. I feel like Aaron Judge should be the MVP. Most years, I'm defaulting to Ohtani to MVP. But when you have a guy putting up a historic season like this, I also look at that Yankees lineup. It's not like I'm in love with a lot of those players in the Yankees lineup. Outside of like an Anthony Rizzo, it's not like they've gotten great production. Like if Aaron Judge ever tweaks his ankle in the postseason, I feel like that team just falls apart. It's over. And I'm sorry, I don't want to make it reductive, but I also want to credit a guy who's doing it on a winning team. The Yankees are arguably the best team in the American League, while the Angels are nowhere near the postseason. I know that's not Ohtani's fault. I know he's having a great season, but if one guy's doing it on an amazing team, one guy isn't, I want to reward the dude who's doing a MVP season on a team that could win the World Series.
Here's where I'll agree with you on that. I normally don't like to look at the record for this because it's not the player's fault. But the fact that when the Yankees were spiraling and they lost Stanton, they lost Rizzo, they had so many injuries, there was nobody in that lineup. And they batted him leadoff. They batted him second. They threw him all over the damn lineup. Sometimes they changed the lineup mid-game. Like, you're starting to get leadoff. Now we're going to move you to fourth. I said, you can't do that, Aaron Boone. Well, I'm going to try. But the fact that through all that, he remained a rock and was like the lone productive player. Here's I think you made a great that does apply to me, but also, and you made a great point. It takes, in order to wrestle the crown away from the king right now, it takes a historic season.
Yeah.
Like, take someone like if Jose Ramirez is having a wonderful season for Cleveland, absolutely wonderful, top 5 MVP candidate. Okay, if it was between Jose Ramirez's fine season and Shohei Ohtani, I'd say Ohtani unanimously.
I got one for you, Sully. Like, what if you just switch Judge and Paul Goldschmidt? You put Goldschmidt in the National League and you put Aaron Judge in the American League. If it's Goldschmidt versus Ohtani in the American League,
I would give it to Ohtani.
Yeah,
that's not a knock on Goldschmidt, who's having a fantastic season. There's a big gray area between deserving the MVP and having a rotten season. There's a big gray area there. It takes this. By the way, I want to just take a look at, he's chasing Roger Maris for the American League home run record. And the year Roger Maris hit the 61 home runs, it was a huge offensive season. It was the first year of expansion. There were a lot of pitchers who probably were not supposed to be in the league. It was a big power year that year. And he led the league with runs, 132, obviously homers, 61, runs batted with 141, total bases. He batted 269. His OPS was 993. Okay. And comparing that to, Judge, who, if you like batting average, then he's batting 312. His OPS is 1.102. His total, and it just is lapping him in virtually every category other than home runs. It's not a knock on Roger Maris. Roger Maris was a fine player who actually won the MVP in 1960, as well as 61. So he wasn't just a one-hit wonder. But for the most of his career, he was a good, solid player who had this unbelievable peak and then went back to being a pretty good player. Judge is one of the elite players in the game. And I like it when the elite players in the game win their MVP. And if he is going to break Maris's record and then torture him in every other category, Maris wore number 9, Judge wears number 99. It takes a season like that. And again, I don't begrudge anyone who would vote for Ohtani as MVP. I totally get it. I just
don't like it when people make others feel dumb for saying it's Judge over Ohtani. Like, if you believe it's Ohtani, fine, but don't be like it's Ohtani and there's no other choice because this he's doing everything on the field. And I can't even listen to any other arguments.
I think that's one reason. Can I just say I think that's one reason why there's a backlash against Mike Trout, because when he was a rookie and Miguel Cabrera won the Triple Crown, for a lot of people, there you go, he won the Triple Crown. That's your MVP. And then the people who were supporting Trout in the argument weren't doing so with a sense of, hey, let me show you why Trout's the one. It was a lot of you're just an old Luddite who doesn't and
it was about advanced analytics. Look at the war. You don't even understand war.
And to this day, I don't understand war. No one has ever explained to me how to calculate war.
I understand the Triple Crown, and you can't understand.
I understand the theory behind war, but I say, how do I know when he gains a war? How do I know? Did that hit? Was that hit worth a war? And then it's like, no, we just take it to this place, and they throw a number at you, and now the conversation's over.
Yep. And
Okay.
also the fun thing about WAR, different websites calculate it differently. They have different formulas for WAR based on the websites. So Fangraphs and Baseball Reference calculate WAR differently. That's why it's a
I don't,
different stat.
and I'm not going to be one of these. I'm not an old Luddite.
I
I
am. That's
like it.
wonderful.
Advanced stats are important to have. I just, and Mike Trout's one of the great players I've ever seen in my life. I just there was a lot. I think there was a backlash because the people who made you feel stupid for being impressed by Miguel Cabrera. I think there may be a backlash against Otani for the same reason. What is it about people having backlash against Angel MVPs?
That was me, Sully. That's when I was born because I was Team Miguel Cabrera. I was like, the Tigers are winning 90 plus games. He's winning triple crowns, but everyone wants to give it to Mike Trout on this terrible team who's also putting up numbers. But give it to Cabrera, who's doing historic stuff on a great team. That's where
In
my hate started for Trout back then.
in the end, Cabrera's a multiple MVP,
Yeah.
Trout's a multiple MVP, and they've both made more money than us.
Yeah, a lot more money. Hey, speaking of money, how about Aaron Judge wrapped up in this MVP conversation? How much money is he going to get this offseason? Because he might get a half bill.
Yeah, and if I were the Red Sox and Mets, I would do everything I can to drive up that price. Everything I can to drive up that price. Hey, let's quickly talk about just the rest of the league. The Arizona Diamondbacks,
Hey,
your team.
my team.
It seems like the playoffs are going through Arizona. You were bringing that up earlier. Make your case why the Diamondbacks, the ability to beat or not beat the Diamondbacks, could be the key if you want to be playing in October.
Yeah, I've talked about this a lot on my podcast because first you had the Padres coming in. They just played us last week. They're playing us right now. They're destroying the D-backs, unfortunately, in that series. So they need to beat the D-backs to win the postseason, to make the postseason and get that wild card because the D-backs also, the final series of the year is against the Milwaukee Brewers. So the D-backs are playing all the hot playoff teams right now in the wild card race. Really, the only two teams that matter right now in the wild card race, the Padres and the Brewers. So for both those teams, they have to beat the Diamondbacks if they want to make the postseason, which I think is also fascinating. And of course, I don't want the Padres to win the NL West rival. And also, just for us D-backs fans personally, we're like within a couple games of the San Francisco Giants for third in the NL West. So if we can knock out the Padres from the wild card race and surpass the Giants for third in the NL West, I know that doesn't matter to anyone else but D-backs fans, but that would be a cool little story in there.
No, I totally get that. I totally get that. And hey, like it seems every 2 minutes there's another young pitcher
Yeah.
who did okay, whether it was Ryan Nelson,
Yeah.
whether it was Dre Jameson.
Mm-hmm.
Dre Jameson pitched great the other day.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of young pitchers who are on this team to go along with Zach Gallen, who finally lost the other day. Zach Davies is not exactly an old man. I mean, they have a halfway decent pitching staff. And if the Christian Walkers and the Ketel Martes and the Alec Thomases of the world and the Dalton Varshos of the world can be consistent, they've all had some decent days, but if they could be consistent, I think this Diamondbacks team is one strategic veteran, a veteran who may not be the superstar, but a strategic veteran to kind of put in to sort of solidify a spot in the lineup and a spot in the rotation and a spot in the bullpen. I guess that's three strategic veterans. They don't have to be the superstars. They can be those players who, like, maybe a future manager who has that kind of influence. It would not surprise me with this good young pitching and some of this young talent if the D-backs are, and I know we've talked about this already, but we're seeing some of this come to fruition, especially with the pitching coming up to the major leagues. Maybe Bumgarner could become that strategic veteran. I know. Okay, that got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll see
All right,
about that.
But you understand what I'm saying. I think this is
Yeah.
a team that is a couple of people who have been there, done that, away from being an 87, 88 win team and being on the wild card chase. They're not going to catch Los Angeles next year, but
No.
they could catch San Diego or Milwaukee.
Yeah, I think they could be in the mix for a wild card. Honestly, I don't even think you have to touch the lineup or the rotation. Like, if you just ran back the rotation and lineup for next season, I think those two spots are good enough to maybe compete for the wild card. The biggest issue for this D-backs team, the one thing I need Mike Hazen to do this offseason is go in there and revamp, rebuild that bullpen. The bullpen is the biggest thing holding back this Diamondbacks team. They haven't been able to figure out the closer position the last few years. They have no high leverage relievers. They basically have Mantiply and Kyle Nelson as the only two guys you could trust in that bullpen. Gallen has been great this year. Merrill Kelly's going to be a top 5-6 Cy Young candidate as well. Davies has been solid. You got a bunch of young rookie pitchers performing well this season. You'll probably see 2 more debuts from rookie pitchers before the year ends. The lineup is loaded with young talent. Christian Walker has turned into a 30 home run guy, and Ketel Marte's having a super down year. So I'm super optimistic when it comes to the lineup and rotation for next year being good enough to compete. It's the bullpen. If Mike Hazen can never figure out that bullpen, if he can't get that turned around, then this D-backs team will never compete for the wild card spot because it's been their biggest drawback the last few years, unfortunately.
How long is Bumgarner on the team? How many more years?
I think he's got 2 more years on that deal. And honestly, everything I've said about Bumgarner, he needs to be DFA'd or turned into a long reliever because
that's what I was about to suggest.
Yeah.
See if he could be a super reliever.
That's it. That's all
see
he's
if
got.
See if he could, because he's going to make the money anyway. Become a super reliever.
I just want him to have like a good 2 months to start the year next year and then trade him for pennies on the dollar if you can. I just want him off this team so we don't have to throw him out there anymore.
Fair enough. We'll look at hey, man.
Hey.
Did it for another week.
That's right.
For another week. And guess what? Next time we meet up, it'll be the fall.
Oh.
And it'll be late September. And there'll only be about maybe a dozen games left in the regular season. And then, I mean, look at I have nothing against Cleveland, Chicago, or Minnesota. I want Cleveland to go on a losing streak and Chicago and Minnesota to go on a winning streak so we could have an airtight AL Central battle down the stretch. But Cleveland just is playing too well. They're just playing too well. So we're going to see what happens. But, hey, Miller, tell people where they can follow you.
Hey, follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account. Follow Locked on Diamondbacks both Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and we're on all your podcasting platforms. And let's hope the Padres go on a losing streak. Yes, sir.
Yes, and you can follow me. We can follow the show at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and on Instagram. And you can follow me. I'm your pal Sully at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Hey, anyone in Los Angeles area wants a dining room table, I'm selling one. So tweet at me at Sully Baseball. We'll make a deal. There you go. I'm selling my dining room table through my podcast. A new low, and this is coming from a man who did a Blue Chew read. Talking about the philosophy of the MVP and the races and what may be in the desert. Is it a mirage in the desert or is it an oasis? This has been the Locked On MLB, Locked On Diamondbacks crossover for the 19th day of September, 2022. I'm yours, Paul Francis Sullivan. Call me Sully. That's Millard Thomas. Let's fist bump!